Hey guys, as many of you probably know, July is the month of the United States Independence Day. So I figured I'd gear this criterion of the month towards the American dream, whatever that is. One obvious choice would have been Easy Rider, but since I've already covered that one, today I'm going to talk about the film that explores Hunter S Thompson's savage journey to the heart of the American dream. Yes, I'm talking about one of my all-time favorite films, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. Now, since I'm a huge fan of Thompson and his work, and the film adaptations that have come from them, in this episode I'm going to be talking a little bit about not only Fear and Loathing, but also Shout Select's new release of Where the Buffalo Roam, as well as the adaptation of Thompson's first work, The Rum Diary. As always, let's take a closer look at the cases themselves. Alright, first let's take a look at Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. On the front we have awesome, crazy artwork done by Ralph Steadman. For those of you not familiar, Steadman is a Welsh artist, I believe, who collaborated with Thompson for a lot of his writings, and he's responsible for the crazy artwork seen throughout some of Thompson's books, like Fear and Loathing. I've always been impressed at how his style perfectly captures the tone and insanity of Thompson's stories. Now let's take a look at the spine. It has this Stedman style title on the spine, very eye-catching. At the bottom it says this is spine number, let's see if I can get that to focus, spine number 175. Now, flipping it to the back, we get a whole bunch of information. It's got a little synopsis, a list of the tons of special edition features included, and a little list of specs, which I always like to see. And of course there's bats, because this is bat country. Inside we can see the disc is stylized with the awesome Steadman Fear and Loathing title, and we get an image of Johnny Depp as well in full Thompson attire. Underneath is yet another classic Steadman Fear and Loathing illustration. Finally, inside, we get this awesome booklet featuring an essay by J. Hoberman and 2 pieces by the good Dr. Thompson himself. I'll flip through it quickly so you can see the trippy images within. Next up, let's take a look at Shout Select's fairly new release of Where the Buffalo Roam, complete with the original soundtrack, which I understand was missing from the older DVD releases. The slipcover features new artwork by Ralph Steadman, and much like all of his other artwork, I absolutely love it. I'm really glad they chose to put this on the slipcover, as it allows me to have the new awesome Steadman cover, while at the same time reversing the inner artwork back to the old school cover for this film. Check that out. As you can see, both are really cool, and I'm glad I just didn't have to choose one of them. Spine has a very similar font as the Fear and Loathing did, and it says this is Shout Select Spine number 21. On the back, we have a little synopsis, some specs, and the special features. A lot of people were disappointed at the lack of special features on this disc, and I admit I was a little disappointed not to see more. Having said that, I'm just glad to have this in high def with the original soundtrack, so the lack of special features doesn't bother me much. Inside is the disc, with Bill Murray in full Thompson attire. There's also this little advertisement insert showing some of Shout Select's other films, and behind it you can see the reversible slipcover. Lastly, before we talk about these films, here's the Rum Diary. There's nothing special about this copy, so I'll just quickly show you the front and the spine, which is very easy to pick out on my shelf, which I like, and the back, which has a synopsis and a list with a lot of the specs clearly put on there, which is always nice. And the inside, we just have some disc art, which appears to be a shot from the film. Overall, I found this Blu-ray plenty good, seeing as I imported it for just a couple of pounds. Now, one last thing before we actually start talking about the movies. I wanted to just say a few things about the writer whose work inspired the films. Hunter S Thompson was an anomaly in the journalistic world. While the status quo at the time, and still today, is to be objective, Thompson recognized that this simply isn't possible, which is something that's terribly evident in mainstream news. Instead, Thompson would make himself a character in his pieces, which eventually became known as gonzo journalism. By doing this, the reader or viewer of the films knows exactly what perspective their information is coming from. And in the case of Thompson, it was coming from a drug-addled, gun-crazy liberal author. I think it's too bad that gonzo journalism seems to have, for the most part, died with the brilliant mind that started it. But rather than delve into the musings on the state of modern journalism, let's talk about the most famous and arguably most accurate representation of Thompson's work, Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas.
We were somewhere around Barstow, on the edge of the desert, when the drugs began to take hold.
This is the first line in the movie, and in my opinion, it's one of the greatest instances of cinematic history of setting up the viewer for what's to come. Fear and Loathing takes place in the early 70s and begins with Thompson receiving an assignment to cover a motorcycle race in Las Vegas. However, much like many of Thompson's other assignments, the focus quickly drifted elsewhere. In this instance, to an insane journey to find the American dream, with his equally insane attorney as a sort of unpredictable sidekick. Without giving away too much, the two find themselves taking a hallucinatory trip around Las Vegas, seeking to experience the American dream, something that in itself is intangible. At the same time, there's a great deal of reminiscence on the events of the 60s, all of the change that took place in America at the time, and the question of what comes next. Fear and Loathing features an excellent cast. Not only do Johnny Depp and Benicio del Toro play fantastic parts, other actors including Christina Ricci, Tobey Maguire, Gary Busey, Cameron Diaz, Mark Harmon, Penn Jillette, Flea, and so many others give this fantastic performances that really help this wacky environment develop in the movie. If you look closely, there's even a scene where Thompson himself has a cameo, playing himself, so keep an eye out for that. And speaking of people involved in this film, Terry Gilliam directs this crazy movie, and it comes as no surprise that he did a fantastic job, given the other surreal and bizarre films he's made, such as Brazil, Monty Python and the Holy Grail, and 12 Monkeys, among others. But he wasn't originally going to make the movie. Alex Cox was initially hired to direct this film, which also seems like a good fit in my opinion, but this didn't work out and Gilliam ended up directing. Casting was crazy as well, and those who were considered to play Thompson's alter ego Raoul Duke included Jack Nicholson, John Cusack, and John Malkovich. At the end of the day, despite the fact that everyone who almost was involved in this film had tons of talent, I'm really glad the final product ended up how it did. Finally, I'd like to mention that the music in Fear and Loathing is top-notch. Artists like Bob Dylan, Jefferson Airplane, and the Yardbirds perfectly capture the late 60s and early 70s vibe of this film, and the song Viva Las Vegas by the Dead Kennedys during the end credits is just crazy enough to wrap up this twisted tale. Bill Murray playing Hunter S. Thompson, Peter Boyle playing his attorney, who Thompson characterized as a 300-pound Samoan. It sounded really odd to me as I saw Fear and Loathing first, but to my surprise, it works very well. This movie is dissimilar to Fear and Loathing, as instead of being a fictionalized version of Thompson based on one of his books, Where the Buffalo Roam depicts a semi fictionalized version of Thompson and his attorney, incorporating bits of novels and articles written by Thompson, information about his history, and more than just a touch of zany gonzo style insanity. In this film, we see lots of bits and pieces of Thompson and his attorney's ventures, including scenes of his attorney defending some pretty young defendants facing ridiculous charges for being caught with a joint or two. We also see Thompson's less than great relationship with Rolling Stone magazine, as he's constantly missing deadlines, spending tons of their money, and even blows off covering Super Bowl VI to go meet his attorney's friends, some freedom fighters hiding out in a remote bunker. For those not familiar with Thompson, his writing, and his life, this film may not work so well, as it seems to sample so much from so many different sources, you almost need to be somewhat familiar with the backstory to get the full amount of enjoyment out of this. That's not to say that it wouldn't be enjoyable for others. Bill Murray is great at adding humor to this film, and Peter Boyle gives a solid performance that elicits plenty of empathy from the viewer. Additionally, the score for this film, largely written by Neil Young and including classics by Jimi Hendrix, Bob Dylan, and CCR, is just fantastic. But if you have seen this film and weren't a fan, I'd recommend doing a little research on Hunter Thompson first and then giving it another shot. Based on one of Thompson's earliest works that was left unpublished until the late 90s, the Rum Diary exhibits some early gonzo journalism style. It features a protagonist, assumably based on Thompson himself, and tells the tale about a young man pursuing journalism in Puerto Rico, which is likely only semi-fictionalized. This movie is an interesting exploration of the culture shock people in these situations must have felt. Our protagonist, Paul Kent, finds himself writing for a failing paper in a place where his language is in the minority, and trying to adapt to a completely different world, all the while succumbing to temptations of cheap booze at almost every turn. On top of that, Kemp finds himself falling for a woman married to a man that he begins working for, a man everyone warns him is trouble. Despite the fact that the film isn't the most faithful adaptation of Thompson's novel, I think it captures the essence of the story. That being the struggling involved in establishing a career as a young writer, all the while in the drunken haze that Thompson no doubt spent plenty of time in. I think this film will appeal most to those who've read the book it's based on or know something about Thompson's early writing endeavors, but as with Where the Buffalo Roam, there's plenty to enjoy in the Rum Diary, even if you're going into it blind. To wrap up this huge Criterion of the Month video / exploration of the films inspired by Hunter S. Thompson, I'll say that I really enjoy all of these movies. I know that has a lot to do with the fact that Hunter S. Thompson is probably my favorite author, but as I said before, I think these films have a lot to offer for any film enthusiast. Of the three, Fear and Loathing is my favorite, and as always, I recommend Criterion's edition, not only for the beautiful picture quality, but for all the cool extras as well. So if you found what I've been rambling on about at all interesting, give Fear and Loathing a shot. If you find you liked it, I definitely recommend checking out the other movies that I mentioned, and maybe reading a Thompson book or two. With that, I hope you enjoyed this review. Let me know in the comments your thoughts on any of this, and other than that, keep it psychic and keep it real.